G'day and welcome back to CounterCulture right here on Spectator Australia TV, where our only allegiance is to truth, honesty and our wonderful patriotic audience in no particular order. We are very excited about our special guest today, legendary novelist and Spectator columnist Lionel Shriver, who shares her thoughts on this unique and dark era in world history. But in better news, Spectator US columnist Daniel McCarthy explains why the Democratic Party is dying. That's right, the Democrats are dying. And the IPA's Daniel Wild joins me to bust myths around Scott Morrison's so-called technology-based emissions reduction plan. Oh, what a mouthful. Plus, Rowan Dean and Sarah Dudley give us their take on Anzac Day. Yes, there's a lot to talk about this week on CounterCulture, so let's get into it.
You probably noticed that our government is almost always adding more currency into our economy than it takes out in taxes. We call this a government deficit, but it's actually a completely normal and necessary response to people saving its currency. The government plays a vital role in helping our economy keep growing. We decide what we want our government paying for, and that sets the amount of currency it creates via spending. The government should then adjust the amount it removes via taxation to just enough so our economy stays at full employment and avoids inflation.
Wonderful. So the government effectively creates money to go and spend on whatever it wants, and then to make up for it, it takes money, your money to be specific, out of circulation. Now, this 21st century blend of bastardised Keynesianism and technocratic socialism has a name. They call it modern monetary theory. It's a euphemism if ever I've heard one. And it's not just limited to cute YouTube videos like the one you just saw. Supposedly credible economists are taking it seriously, and worse still, they're putting it into action. Since the coronavirus began, the US Federal Reserve, one of many central banks, has printed an additional $2 trillion US. That's a third of all US currency currently in circulation. A third of US dollars in existence printed in 1 year alone. And there's more to come, much more, with Joe Biden waking up once or twice a month to announce trillions and trillions in new spending. Now, anybody who doesn't think this is a problem, well, they're out of their minds. But one person who does take this seriously is the legendary novelist and Spectator columnist Lionel Shriver. 5 years ago, she warned about a future economic crisis in The Mandibles, A Family 2029-2047. That's a dystopian novel about the complete societal collapse as a result of the US defaulting on its debt. Now, it not only is a brilliant novel, which you absolutely must read, it's also exceptionally well researched and a wake-up call to anyone who says that debt doesn't matter. And now, 5 years later, it's looking highly and terrifyingly relevant. So it's an honour to welcome onto the show Lionel Shriver. Miss Shriver, how are you?
I'm surviving.
Aren't we all in this year of our Lord 2021? Now, before we get into The Mandibles, which I'm really keen to talk about, let's talk a little bit about, the cultural collapse before we get to economic collapse, and your latest piece in The Spectator about the extraordinary self-flagellation that the Western world, America and the UK and so on, but also Australia where I am, is going down. And it has to be asked, how can any country or indeed civilization survive when there's nobody around who wants to defend it anymore?
Well, I was trying to call attention in my most recent column to the fact that when the Western left hair shirts its way around and talks about how terrible we are and what an awful history we have, how racist we are, and other people are listening. And in particular, China is listening. And, I don't admire or wish to copy the nature of Chinese nationalism. It actually makes my skin crawl. All those dancers in unison and they can come across as brainwashed, frankly. So I'm glad that we have a more elastic understanding of what patriotism means. And I appreciate both in Britain and in the US, where I'm obviously from, the right to not be patriotic, right? That's something that is an option. Nobody makes you wave a flag. And you do indeed have the freedom to criticize your country and your government and to trash it. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the freedom to do that, but I think that we should be more mindful of what it looks like when we take full advantage of that privilege to be down on our own country. And, we've got a strange inversion going on right now, whereby to be very down on your country and to, for white people, even to denigrate your entire race is to make a bid for status, right? It makes you better. Now that may work in terms of internal political dynamics for whatever weird reasons, but it really doesn't work in an international context to the Chinese and or for that matter, to the Russians as well. It just looks like weakness.
And you mentioned complacency, and that's the perfect segue into The Mandibles. Now, this is a novel that you wrote 5 years ago. It is a dystopian novel. Well, I don't want to gush, I don't want to be a fanboy, but this is, I think, the most important novel.
Oh, go ahead.
Very well, if you insist. Look, I think this is the most important novel of the 21st century. It's the Atlas Shrugged of our times, and it very realistically paints the picture of total economic collapse following years of mounting debt, following the default on that debt, following the money printing, inflation, hyperinflation and so on. Now, fast forward to 5 years after you wrote the book, you see the Biden administration creating trillions more dollars out of thin air. How nervous are you watching what's going on now versus when you wrote the book?
I think that the U.S. especially is playing with dynamics that nobody understands, and on a level that's never been experimented with before. I had reason for my new column to look up the federal budgets for 2020 and 2021, and oh my Lord. I mean, the proportion of deficit to earned income, if you will, revenue, is astonishing. I mean, it's not quite 1-to-1, but it's close. It's something, the projection for 2021 is that the budget will be 5.8 trillion, something in there, and something like 2.7 trillion of it is debt. The scale of that is astonishing, and it's not a one-off. I just see insolvency at every turn, and I'm afraid maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but this modern monetary theory thing just sounds like a plain old Ponzi scheme, a plain old scam. It is absolutely impossible that the government can simply print as much money as it likes to pay for everything, and you don't have to cover it with taxes, and everything's going to remain fine, and those dollars are still going to be just as valuable.
You're right, and this is, to me, is the key, I guess, Rubicon that we've crossed here. We've gone from, oh, look, we need to spend a lot now, but we'll pay it back later, she'll be right, we'll grow out of it, to modern monetary theory, which is this idea that not only is printing all this money consequence-free, it's actually the economically responsible thing to do.
One of the things that it's dependent on is interest rates basically being at zero.
Correct.
But one of the conclusions I have drawn from the last 15 years is that capitalism doesn't function with zero interest rates. I mean, if you can just borrow money indefinitely, then why ever earn it?
Yeah.
Borrow, die. And and we have incentivized debt. I mean, and lots of, if you look at the nature of the stock market, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's staggering, the percentage of money in the stock market that is leveraged.
Yeah.
It's borrowed money. And we have incentivized people to borrow money to invest in the stock market, and that is creating a bubble.
And that's the parallel to 1929, the stock market crash. It's a very, very similar set of situations when you had this highly overinflated stock market, and one piece of their Jenga tower got removed, and we know the consequences then. Something's got to give, surely.
I don't enjoy this experience, but I have to say that I keep having this feeling of living before something horrible.
Exactly.
And that changes everything. And I don't mean the coronavirus. It doesn't qualify. It's not bad enough. I would say that the response to the coronavirus has been an absolute catastrophe, but still not nearly on the scale that I'm talking about, although what we have done to ourselves economically as a consequence of overreacting to this pandemic makes what I'm talking about more likely. Now, I tend to imagine collapse being economic, but the truth is that problems never develop in a vacuum, and the consequences of a certain kind of collapse also have effects on other parts of society. Some of what I tried to express in the novel. So, if we have an economic collapse, it's going to be a collapse of everything else. And there is definitely a kind of center not holding feeling in the Western institutions having no faith in themselves, and also being distracted from what their core purposes are. And that's one of my biggest problems with the obsession with diversity. Is that you've got companies and arms of government and certainly universities that have completely lost a grip on what their purpose is. I mean, they actually think that what their prime goal is to be diverse, rather than
some sort of public function,
a diverse workforce to accomplish something else.
Correct.
Right? This is incredibly self-destructive.
You have also written extensively and correctly about coronavirus restrictions and the hitherto unthinkable cascade of extremely invasive limitations to our personal freedoms that have resulted from that. I mean, do you think we have crossed a Rubicon here? Do you think this has really softened us up for whatever comes next?
I'm into darkness as entertainment, right? I mean, that's my stock and trade. And therefore, it's kind of out there. It's like you can literally shut the book on it and go pour yourself a drink and have a good time. And this is different. This is a darkness that has really penetrated how I see people. And I have been so deeply disappointed and frightened, genuinely frightened, and not of that bloody virus. But, the British, for example, have all kinds of vanities about World War II, and hitherto I've considered them well-earned, at least by previous generations. And they've got that plucky stood up to Hitler and defeated the tyrant thing. Okay. Stood firm during the Blitz. And I'd previously been very happy for them to cling to that mythology. It's a positive mythology. It's a good mythology. But now I'm convinced that, Hitler would take about 2 weeks and he'd have the British in his hip pocket. And I don't say that with any pleasure.
No.
And that's frightening. And we have found just across the board that Western populations have completely capitulated, and not only capitulated, but willingly and almost happily, and have become zealots for the new ideology, and have displayed no capacity for independent thought or even the ability to use the bloody internet.
I think we're in for a few bad years. God forbid something as bad as what you described in the mandibles, but there are enough people taking notice, there are enough people reading, there are enough people producing content like this to keep that ember of freedom alive. I mean, is that, I guess, what we should take heart in this abysmal year of our Lord 2021?
Well, yeah, and there's always another roll of the dice. I mean, at some point there has to come another generation that finds all this critical race theory guff, mommy and daddy's bullshit, excess deaths. It's what we haven't faced yet, which is what we have done to the economy.
But in the meantime, I commend this book to anybody with an interest in the future of the free world. As I said, it is a very, very important novel. And to you, Lionel Shriver, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and for joining us on CounterCulture this morning.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate a plug for the book. The one thing lockdown's given us is lots of time to read.
Correct. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Lionel. Talk to you soon.
Hope so.
Now, we'll be releasing the extended interview with Lionel Shriver next week. Plenty more content on the Spectator Australia TV YouTube channel. So make sure you hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss it. And as you can tell, I loved reading this book and I want you to read it as well. So here's what we're going to do. Sign up for the next week for 1 week only to our Corkscrewed offer, and we will also include a copy of The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver as a special gift. Watch until later in the show for more details, or head straight away to ipa.org.au/corkscrew. And if you're liking this content, be sure to click the like button down below and like this video. And once again, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss any of the Spectator Australia TV content. Every click of that mouse button helps us beat that YouTube algorithm and get the word out to more and more Australians. And now, as always, let's hear from Spectator Australia Editor-in-Chief, Rowan Dean. Rowan, how are you?
I'm great, Gideon. How are you, mate?
I am very, very well. Now, the cover this week's Spectator Australia magazine has a very Anzac theme, a very poignant front cover that I'll be getting to with Sarah Dudley in a moment. But for your part in your editorial, we've sort of done a new take on the Anzac spirit, sort of a halfway house between Lest We Forget and Rudyard Kipling's famous poem, If. So talk us through what the message of that is and what you want to say about Anzac Day this year.
Well, I was thinking about Lest We Forget and the fact that it's a reminder. It pops around every year, and I call it slightly tongue-in-cheek, referred to it as, the post-it note stuck up on the fridge saying, Anzac this Sunday, don't forget the poppies and the 2-Up and the beers in the fridge. And I started thinking, well, it's actually, that's quite misleading. And that, in fact, Lest We Forget contains a warning. And the idea of Lest We Forget is very much, if you forget, these will be the consequences. And we kind of forget that part of the message as we concentrate on commemorating Anzac Day. So I just started jotting down what really the warnings were if we forgot X, Y, and Z. And I soon realized this list was running on. And I've written the editorial in the sense of what those three words, Lest We Forget, actually would convey if you spelt it all out in detail. And maybe it's time we did start to spell it out in detail. All the things that we have forgotten, from resilience, from teaching our children discipline and self-discipline, to remembering the lessons of the past, to being vigilant about the enemy at our doorstep and recognizing that enemy, to be prepared to call out falsehoods when we hear them, to educate our children and the young in the classics, in the things that we have inherited from the past, the presumption of innocence. The list goes on and on and on. All the things you suddenly realize that in the last really 2 or 3 decades, but particularly increasingly in the last few years, we have thrown away. And that warning from the Anzacs, from the diggers, if you forget all these things, you are going to end up having to fight as we did. You are going to end up in a world of chaos, hopefully not bloodshed, but potentially bloodshed, certainly anarchy and decline, as we had to fight to restore in our lives. And that's the real message of Anzac Day, is this warning that if you neglect so many precious things, so many lessons of the past, you're going to have to relive them and you're going to have to fight all over again for them.
Rowan, great edition this week, as I said. Speak to you next week.
Thanks, Gideon. See you, mate.
And remember, if you want to read more from our outstanding stable of talent here at The Spectator Australia, just head over to spectator.com.au. And if you like what you see, subscribe to The Spectator Australia today to get instant access to all of our outstanding content, including the weekly Spectator Australia magazine, all the articles in our online section, Flat White, and great international authors like Douglas Murray, Brendan O'Neill, James Dillingpole, and many, many more. Just call 1-800-809-233 and quote Spectator Australia TV.
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
Yeah, the Democrats were riding high that day in November last year, and as it happened, they did take Georgia. As for changing America, well, we'll see, but so far, not so good. But according to Spectator US columnist Daniel McCarthy, the Democratic Party may be on the verge of collapse. Music to my ears if ever I've heard it. In last weekend's edition, he wrote that the party's demographics are in decline and that they cannot continue to win office without gaming the electoral system, which unfortunately appears to be exactly what they're doing. But anyway, let's hear from him now. Daniel McCarthy, welcome to CounterCulture and Spectator Australia TV. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, look, thank you so much for coming on, because what you've written is something that our audience desperately needs to hear right now. I think we all do, which is that you think that despite the fact that they occupy the Oval Office, despite the fact that they received purportedly, a record number of votes for Joe Biden for somehow at the last election, despite all of that, you reckon that the Democratic Party is in decline. Talk us through that one.
Yeah, it's in rather sharp decline. I mean, just think about a dozen years ago when Barack Obama had just taken office. The Democrats then also had a majority in the House of Representatives. They had the majority in the Senate. But they had firm majorities. They had, well over 50 seats in the Senate, and they had a fairly healthy margin in the House of Representatives. Today, they have first of all, it's the thinnest House majority today that has ever existed, as far as I know, certainly going back, to modern history, back to World War II or so. And in the Senate, they don't actually have a majority. They only have a 50-50 split with Kamala Harris as the the deciding vote. And it's remarkable because, Joe Biden got 81 million is the official, number that votes he received. And yet, despite Joe Biden having received such an overwhelming number of votes, he could not translate that into an endorsement for his party, into a mandate for his party, an overwhelming legislative majority for his party.
So what does the Republican coalition look like in 2022 and especially in 2024, and where are their extra votes going to come from?
The Republicans have to win back a lot of these suburban votes that they lost in this past election. And it was a combination of things. A lot of people want to blame it entirely on Donald Trump's personality, on the fact that he may have turned off a lot of, suburban country club Republican types. But also, the conditions that the Republicans were facing in 2020 were, almost insurmountable. So that again makes me think that it's very telling that the Republicans did as well as they did in the House and they actually gained seats. It certainly indicates that there is not some sort of extreme confidence on the part of the American people in the Democratic Party.
How does that position the Republicans for 2022? And secondly, more importantly, can Trump come back in 2024? I think we need him. I think it's got to be Trump.
Well, in 2022, the Republicans are in danger of taking it for granted because there is this tendency to have a pendulum where, you will have a swing against the president's party in the midterm elections. And so the Republicans, who already are just a few votes shy of having control of the House of Representatives, feel very confident that they'll be able to get, the small number they need in order to take control. Similarly, in the Senate, with a 50-50 split, if the Republicans can do just win a net of one seat in the Senate, they'll have control again. But they're going to need to be able to, sort of take advantage of the way in which the Democrats are misgoverning right now, misgoverning at the national level by constantly pushing for these radical changes like admitting new states and packing the court, and the way the Democrats are misgoverning in the cities right now, which is absolutely turning into a bloodbath. And of course, the major victims of the rising homicide rates in America's cities are black people themselves. So the Democrats are, in fact, they're creating a phantom menace. They're attacking police officers when, in fact, it's the criminal element, which is the most dangerous thing to Black Americans and to all Americans. This is, I think, a very good message if Republicans are able to kind of firmly enunciate it. And if they're not scared of being painted by the Democrats as being racist or endorsing, police beatings of people or whatever. The Republicans have to be able to, be like Trump a little bit and go out there and make their message very clear and firm and not be intimidated by the Democrats. Now, in terms of what happens in 2024, Donald Trump is not a guy who accepts defeat. He is someone who has come back from multiple bankruptcies. He's someone who, there were a number of embarrassing incidents in the 2016 election where people said, well, by conventional standards, Trump is just finished. This is the end. And of course, each time he came back, Donald Trump is highly competitive as well. He's the apprentice guy, right? So I think he looks at Joe Biden and says, is this guy really better than me? Could he really beat me in an election? Can't I beat him if I run again in 2024, or beat Kamala Harris if she runs instead of Joe Biden?
It's going to be Kamala.
So yeah, I think that Trump is contemplating another run. I do think that he perhaps didn't enjoy being president as much as he might have thought he would. That he found that the government simply doesn't operate the way that a private company does, and that he can't trust a lot of the people in his own administration, let alone the people in the media or the people in the other party. So and then Donald Trump is indeed getting older, just as certainly Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are.
I just think things will be so bad by the time Americans go to vote in 2024. People will look back at Trump and say, "Look, I didn't like the tweeting or the vulgarity or blah 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 blah, but." Geez, things are a lot better back then. Give us back Trump. And I think he could win in a landslide, and I think he could finish the job of making America great again. But to you, Daniel McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us. That was very, very insightful. That was very, very interesting, and it certainly gave me a lot of hope. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to go and watch old footage of election night in 2016 to cheer myself up a bit. So have a great day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
And now let's hear what you had to say in the YouTube comment section of last week's episode. Randy Z writes, "We are seeing more and more woke cartoons and kids shows on Australian TV. Unfortunately, our kids don't have many options apart from the ABC. Maybe Spectator Australia TV could come up with something." Well, that was in response to our bit on woke cartoons from last week's episode, but I like the sound of that. I like it a lot. There are so many jokes I could make about this, but it's up to you now. What do you think we should offer as part of a possible Spectator Australia TV children's lineup? Leave a comment down below and let us know what you think. And Nat Not writes, "The world looks grim and it's only the beginning." Well, look, Nat, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by telling you it doesn't look grim. It is grim. These are very difficult times. But we are optimists on this show. We really are. Yes, it's not a good time for freedom, and with the year 2020, we entered a unique and terrible historical era. But history shows us that you can suppress freedom for a while, but not forever. One way or another, this will end. This will self-correct. And now with that, it's time to hear from our covers editor, Sarah Dudley. Sarah, how are you?
I'm great, Gideon. How are you?
I am doing very well. Now, the cover this week is a lot more serious than what our covers usually are. So talk us through this very, very, as I said, serious and confronting but important message.
It's a very difficult subject. So I'll start with the headline, which is "Lest We Forget." And I think that that's very familiar. Everyone knows that. But, over the decades, a group of people have been forgotten along the way, and they are the diggers who took their own lives. This week, the Royal Commission was established in recognition of that fact. So we're using the cover imagery, which is very empathetic. The Anzac dawn, sunrise, the shafts of sunlight are reflecting on the digger, and he's always seen in silhouette. And, it's a very poignant image, but this time he's taken his life.
Yeah.
And the Aussie flag is his noose, because clearly Australia has failed him. This is the right day, Gideon, to honour these heroes. And I do hope that the Royal Commission managed to solve the problem, but I think that it's going to take some time.
It's an issue that I think is really important, because we talk about the sacrifices made by people who don't come back from war, but we don't do the best job in this country of looking after people who do. And I read a report a little while ago about morale being low in the ADF. Now, in the past year or so, the ADF, Australian soldiers have been slagged off by the Prime Minister as in the course of that Afghan war crimes thing. They've been demonised in the media. They've been embarrassed by lousy procurement decisions like submarines in South Australia. They've been embarrassed by their top brass saying all manner of woke stuff in the media. And on top of all that, they're treated with appalling neglect when they come home from service. I mean, is it any surprise that morale in our armed forces is very low at the moment?
Well, Gideon, I'd be surprised if they weren't depressed. Add post-traumatic stress disorder into the mix and, the warning lights are all flashing. Rebecca Weiser, she wrote the cover story and she references the world of woke at war with the armed forces. And she gives many, many examples of this, one of which is how Daniel Andrews in Victoria was offered help from the armed forces to set up the quarantine program. And he refused with absolutely dire consequences.
Correct, and that's another thing I forgot to leave off my last question. They were turned on Australian citizens last year to enforce these absurd coronavirus restrictions. So again, that must be another thing adding to the morale issues within the ADF. But looking at the debate around whether Anzac Day could even go ahead or not. Now, in the past few months, we've had the tennis go ahead, we've had the football go ahead, we've had Moomba go ahead, all sorts of other things. What do we cancel? Anzac Day. What does that say about our priorities?
Anzac events are outside, and it's pretty clear by now that that's not how you catch COVID. Thousands of people can go to the football and enjoy themselves, but, go on a march, Forgive me for being cynical, Gideon, but I think that the states think perhaps they think more of votes and money that they can get from sport than honouring a century of sacrifices from the diggers. But to answer your question about priorities, I'd say that the states are punishing the selfless while rewarding the hedonists.
That's exactly true. I couldn't have put it better myself. Well, Sarah, great cover this week. It's an important cover, an important statement, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Brilliant, Gideon. See you then.
And now let's take a look at what else is in the Spectator Australia this weekend. In this Anzac Day weekend edition, Rebecca Weiser takes a hard look at how the Australian military is becoming increasingly politicised. Boy, is it ever. John Ruddick makes the observation that out of our 10 most recent Prime Ministers, Scott Morrison is the only one not to show any political interest in his youth. Make of that what you will. Dr. Tom Cade says that when it comes to medical advancement, the science is never, ever settled. And over at Flat White, the IPA's own Kian Hussey says that it might be a mistake to embrace the so-called services industry at the cost of manufacturing. A really fascinating article there. Links to all of those articles will be in the show notes, and of course you can see all our content at spectator.com.au. And while you're over on our website, be sure to sign up for the Morning Double Shot, a daily edition of Spectator Australia goodness brought to you by editor Terry Barnes. Terry is up bright and early each and every morning scanning the news and offering you your first shot of comment for the day, helping you make sense of whatever madness the morning news brings, plus your daily highlights of what the Spectator Australia is saying about the issues that matter. Morning Double Shot arrives at 7 a.m. each and every morning, so check it out, sign up and be informed.
What creates a strong economy is fairness and decency.
You're not answering the question, Mr. Shorten.
Oh, okay. I'm going to give someone else a go.
Answer the question. When can people know?
Dan.
When can people know, Mr. Shorten, the cost of the economy? You didn't answer the question.
Do you know what, John?
Leading to this fiery exchange.
We're here to ask questions and you're not answering the question.
Dan.
When can people expect to know, Mr. Shorten, the cost of the economy?
All right, Dan.
Why can't you answer the question, Mr. Shorten?
Because I'm going to give your colleagues half a go.
No, because
Dan.
you should answer it. Why can't you answer the question, Mr. Shorten?
Dan, I'm going to go to you.
Well, it was the exchange that changed an election. You see, I'm old enough to remember a time when Labor weren't unelectable as they say they are now. I don't believe it, but anyway. I remember a time when the coalition absolutely couldn't win. And it's easy to see why. I mean, after 2 terms of infighting and 3 years of catastrophic leadership under the great communicator Malcolm Turnbull, well, I didn't expect the coalition to win, nor did I think they deserved to, if I'm being brutally honest. But as Napoleon once said, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. And one thing the coalition did have is the good sense to let Labor bang on about it being a climate election. And as it happened, the people responded accordingly. So why then is Scott Morrison now bringing up bloody climate change every chance he gets, including this week in his major flagship speech. Well, you see, the Prime Minister, I think, reckons he's found a fix to this climate business, the climate wars, as it's called by the chattering classes. He thinks he's figured out that political Rubik's Cube. ScoMo says the solution on climate isn't a carbon tax or anything like that, heavens no. But instead we'll just invest in cleaner technology. Well, that sounds good. Everyone's a winner from that, right? Well, wrong. But luckily for us, the IPA's Daniel Wild has done extensive research into the real costs of all that so-called clean technology, and I sat down with him earlier to bust the myths wide open. Dan Wild, Director of Research here at the IPA, welcome to the Chamber of Horrors. How are you?
Gideon, great. Good to be back with you, mate.
Yeah, good to have you. Now, let's talk about ScoMo's Road to Damascus on climate change. There's a lot of headlines, a lot of misleading misinformation, dangerous misinformation, as they'd say. So Scott Morrison says that we can get net zero, we can have it all. We can get net zero, we'll have this clean energy future, and it's not going to cost us a cent. There'll be none of those new taxes. So everyone's a winner, aren't they?
If only, Gideon, if only. And this is a classic Morrison focusing on the spin rather than the substance. But what we know is one way or another, Australians are going to be hit with a net zero emissions target. It's a carbon tax by stealth. Now, you're either going to get to net zero by taxing industries you don't like, regulating industries you don't like, or subsidising industries that you apparently do like. But either way, this is going to hit Australians working in mining, manufacturing and agricultural sectors. It's going to be Australians in regional Australia that are going to incur the costs of a net zero emissions target, but it's not going to be the inner city elites. No. It's not going to be those living in Canberra. They're protected from the negative consequences.
The people in the wine bars and so on that ScoMo talked about.
Well, he likes to talk about them, but the reality is they are the ones that are setting the policy. This is a policy designed by and for the inner city elites at those cafes and wine bars in inner city Melbourne and inner city Sydney. So this is a very concerning development, even more so, and you've mentioned this many times, 2019, what was it? The climate election. 2013, what was that? A referendum on the carbon tax. So whenever Australians are asked, do you want a carbon tax? No. Do you want a net zero emissions target? No. But then what happens? The political class do it anyway.
Yeah, they do it anyway. And you've done a lot of great research and a lot of great work on Paris. You know, when Paris was the big issue du jour, and we the IPA have argued for the pulling out of Paris. But basically in that report going all the way back then, you said that this idea that we can achieve even the Paris targets, which is less than net zero, based on energy alone, that's just a myth, isn't it?
It is a myth, Gideon. There's a couple of points about Paris that not a lot of people know about. So this is the Paris Climate Agreement, signed in and ratified in 2015. And we have in Australia the deepest cuts to emissions on a per capita basis anywhere in the world. Now, when you haven't heard anyone say that in the political class, we have the deepest cuts to emissions per capita. China,
they say we're not doing enough.
They say we're not doing enough. We're doing the most. And we are a resource-intense nation.
Correct.
China, who is the single largest emitter of carbon, is completely unconstrained by the Paris Climate Agreement. So if we want to talk about emissions, let's get some facts on the table. But the other point about Paris, Gideon, is that it's got very little to do with the climate or the environment and everything to do with geopolitics, economic advantage. And what is happening to Australia is this de-industrialisation. We're losing our jobs, we're losing our regions, we're losing our way of life, but it's also putting us at a competitive disadvantage compared to America, compared to Europe, compared to China. So no matter which way we look at it, it is not good for our nation.
But I mean, we couldn't be at that much of a competitive advantage because the rest of the world is acting, aren't we? I mean, you know, we're so far behind the rest of the world according to the Kevin Rudds and Tim Flannerys of the world. So, you know, we should catch up.
Well, that's right, Gideon. We should catch up. The European Union, you hit on an important point. The European Union is not meeting its targets. Like I said, China is unconstrained. The US is not meeting its targets. So why are we? Why are we the only nation in the Western world that is pursuing this so vigorously? It doesn't make any sense.
But look, it's not all doom and gloom, is it? I mean, there'll be, for all the jobs that may be lost in some of those old, you know, industries like coal, you know, never mind that it's our number one export, I mean, that little thing, there'll be new green jobs created. Won't those green jobs be better?
Well, Gideon, the point here is that there's no such thing as a new green economy. I mean, this is the line that you see Anthony Albanese talking about it. You know, we're going to have these green jobs, green steel, green manufacturing. Anything with green before it doesn't really exist.
No.
And what we know is that over the last 10 years, for every one job that's been created in the renewables sector, 5 jobs have been destroyed in manufacturing. So there's this myth that, well, those Australians that are working in mining or in agriculture or in manufacturing, the ones that are losing their jobs will find new jobs in this green economy. But that's just not true.
No.
Many of them are losing their jobs and they're never going to find work ever again. And this is not just an economic problem. This is a humanitarian catastrophe. And this is something
a moral
that
problem
it's
too.
a deeply moral problem because it's not the people imposing this policy that are losing their jobs. No, this is hardworking Australians in the regions and outer suburbs who voted for the Morrison government. They got them into government and now they're being hit by the Morrison government.
Still though, green, new technology, all this sort of stuff, it's got to be a vote winner, doesn't it?
Well, interesting, Gideon. If you look at the coalition, we've done some research looking at the electoral dynamics. We've talked a bit about the culture and the economics, and we're looking at the electoral dynamics. And what's interesting is that the Liberal Party and the coalition more generally is fairly bifurcated. So they have the vast majority of voters vote for them who are in those industries, in agriculture, in mining, to a lesser extent in manufacturing, although they did swing towards the coalition at the 2019 election. But they also hold a majority of the seats in the inner cities where a low number of people work in those industries. So this is the two. You have the teal component of the Liberal Party, this kind of green liberal component in the inner cities, and then you have the heartland out in the regions and the outer suburbs. So there's been this tension in the coalition for a long time. But just on net zero, we know that it's actually the Nationals, 7 out of the top 10 seats that will lose the most jobs from a net zero emissions target are held by the Nationals party room.
Is that right?
And so this is why you have people like Senator Matt Canavan saying, well, hold on a minute. You know, this is not what we promised and this is not what we want for our country or for our party.
But Matt Canavan is no longer in the leadership of the Nationals. You know, he went with Barnaby Joyce more or less. So what are the leadership of the current, what are Michael McCormack and those people going? Are they going along with this, or is there any pushback?
It appears they're going along with it. There's not a lot of pushback. You see Senator Canavan. It is, and you see Senator Canavan and some others speaking out. But in terms of the leadership, I think you're right. But the broader issue here is that it's not just about the Liberal Party or the Nationals. It's about Australia. It's about who has a voice. Who is the voice for mainstream Australia? They don't have a voice. It's not in the Labor Party.
No.
They call them racist and xenophobe and they don't care about their jobs. It's not really in the Liberal Party.
No.
Because they're focused on these inner city seats.
Correct.
You know? Now, it's places like here, I mean, this is why so many people are watching this show, because it's things like this, which is the mainstream, the voice for mainstream. But there needs to be a political realignment to take place so that the Liberals and the Nationals need to become the coalition of working class mainstream Australians to give them a voice again.
But anyway, to you, Dan Wild, you're doing so much excellent research on this. I think we're the only organisation really in the country left who are speaking out against this lunacy. Everybody else has taken the blue pill and all this stuff. So thank you for the work you do. Looking forward to having you on again, and I suspect we'll be talking about this many a time.
Thanks, Gideon, and congratulations on your increasing viewership on this show. It's
Thanks,
going great.
Man. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Well, this program is a co-production of the Institute of Public Affairs. For 78 years, the IPA has been Australia's voice for freedom, democracy and the Australian way of life. We fight for freedom of speech, the power of the free market, an honest debate on climate change and the timeless value of Western civilization. We don't receive a cent from government and are not beholden to nervous advertisers. We speak out only because of the support of thousands of great Australians who are proud and paid up IPA members. Now, as you may know, over the past few weeks, we've had a special offer for new IPA members, a bonus copy of Corkscrewed, the brilliant novel written by the Spectator Australia's very own Rowan Dean. And as I said earlier in the show, for 1 week only, we are throwing in this additional special gift, The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver, which, as I said, everybody must read. So sign up now to the Institute of Public Affairs and you'll receive a copy of Lionel Shriver's novel, Rowan Dean's novel, as well as exclusive benefits like priority access and discounts to IPA events, our quarterly magazine, the IPA Review, our weekly email roundup for freedom enthusiasts, Hey, What Did I Miss?, regular updates from Executive Director John Roscombe offering his take on the tough issues of the week, policy updates from our gun research team, giving you all the ammunition you need to own the lefty made at your next insufferable dinner party, and some merch as well, of course. And of course, on top of all that, you'll be supporting the IPA's work in defending freedom, democracy, and the Australian way of life. Just head to ipa.org.au/corkscrewed, sign up today, and join Australia's voice for freedom. Well, that's it for this edition of CounterCulture right here on Spectator Australia TV. And now over to you. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think about anything we've talked about today. We always love hearing from you. We always love the comments we get each and every week. And remember, to access all the content from the Spectator Australia, just call 1-800-809-233 and quote Spectator Australia TV. And finally, remember to like this video and subscribe to the Spectator Australia TV channel, because every click of that mouse button helps us beat big tech censorship and get the message out to more and more Australians. So, see you next week, friends.